world has gone insane. Cosplayers rule the conventions, gamers dominate the tabletop, and the internet. Sci-fi subjugates the movies, and fantasy rules the bookstore with an iron fist. Only one group can bring order to this unruly mob. A team of uber geeks, masters of the nerdly arts, trained for decades in the hobby shops and basements of the nation. Mobilized by the secret masters, they are the Department of Nerdly Affairs.
Hello, operatives, and welcome to the Department of Nerdly Affairs. I'm your host, Rob Patterson, here with my co-host, Don Chisholm.
Sup?
And tonight, we're going to get literary. But don't worry, that doesn't mean we're going to be talking about Charles Dickens or anything like that. We're going to be talking about litRPGs, a new and exciting genre that's kind of come onto the scene over the last couple years, and one that most people are probably not even aware of. So, in order to solve that problem, we've brought in an expert, Ramon Meija, host of the litRPG podcast. Welcome to the show, Ramon.
Hey, everybody. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
And it's great to have you here, especially considering that you do the only podcast on the subject. So I think that pretty much makes you the expert.
Yeah, at least in the podcasting world.
Awesome. So, first, how about you tell our audience, what are litRPGs? Because they're probably scratching their heads right now.
Yeah, no problem. litRPG or literary RPG, they're stories that incorporate role-playing game mechanics into the storyline. So you'll see things like level ups, skill notifications. You'll get XP for killing monsters. They're really an extension of video games, tabletop role-playing games. Those kind of mechanics actually being written and explained in a story and being relevant to character growth.
Huh. Okay. So where did this term come from then?
Oh, the term litRPG, well, depending on who you ask, there are a couple of variations of origin. I recently interviewed a Russian author, Vasily Mahenko. He's the author of The Way of the Shaman series. He's been writing his litRPG stories for about 7 years. And he says that he came up with the actual term litRPG, or literary RPG, as a way to describe the kind of stories that are becoming very popular in Russia, Korea, China, and Japan. These stories that incorporated virtual reality games, MMOs, or even just, parallel worlds with game mechanics that were evident. And so he says he came up with it.
That's interesting, considering he's Russian, right? So
yeah.
Would they have used the English term litRPG, or is he using some Russian equivalent that we just translated that way?
No, he said, well, he actually speaks English pretty decently.
Okay.
So and the term, a lot of English words like role-playing game, sometimes they just translate directly as, RPGs. The acronyms translate directly in other languages. So I think for him it was a combination of both of those. But he says he came up with it, and I can't find anything to dispute that. So I give him credit.
Is he one of the first authors of this genre?
I don't know that I would say he was one of the first authors. He's definitely one of the more popular Russian authors. The litRPG community in the United States has really only been around for about 3, 4, maybe 5 years at the longest. But in other countries, it's been around for 10, 15 years. In Russia, in Korea, in Japan, in China. These communities where there's also a very large gaming culture. In Korea, one of the most popular games is going to be StarCraft. Games that require multiple players, MMOs. And so it kind of makes sense that those type of interests would mesh very well with fantasy and sci-fi literature. And so including those mechanics was kind of a natural response to that kind of developing gaming culture.
Right.
Interesting. So do we have any idea where they came from? Like, was this just the result of that response to that gaming culture then?
In part, like most literature to me is often a response or reflection of cultures and attitudes that exist in the real world. And litRPG is no different, in my opinion. About 10, 15 years ago, the oldest litRPG that I would classify as litRPG came from Korea. An original light novel is called the Moonlight Sculptor. That's what it's called in English.
Right.
And, 15 years ago. It was written there, and from there, other writers saw the popularity that the author was getting, and they copied it, and it kind of spread throughout Korea, spread throughout Japan, the Asian countries, into Russia, a neighboring community. And it was only in the last 3 or 4 years that those works were translated into English, and we as American gamers and virtual reality enthusiasts and fantasy and sci-fi lovers found them, and we started loving them and creating our own stuff.
Would Ready Player One be classified as a lit RPG?
Yeah, in my opinion, it does. Now, just to explain to your audience members exactly what litRPG is, I gave you a brief description of it, but it can kind of encompass a lot of different traditional sci-fi and fantasy genres. The things that make litRPG unique and litRPG-ish, there are 2 qualifiers, in my opinion. And this is kind of debatable in different communities. There's a Facebook group for litRPG that just recently had this huge, long discussion. And we kind of came up with these 2 qualifiers. One, the story must exist, at least partially, in a world with expressly stated game mechanics. So in a lot of older traditional fantasy stories, like from Dungeons & Dragons stories, Drizzt to Erden, those kind of games that are still based on tabletop games, the game mechanics are completely hidden. You don't see them.
Right.
They feel like more fantasy stories, even though if you're a Dungeons & Dragons player, he just did a D20 roll. He had a critical hit. Or he's taken the dual will feed. In a lit RPG, all those things are expressly stated in text. It'll say a blue box appears and you gained a level to the character. And so that's one of the things that kind of defines the genre. Now, the other qualifier that makes a story a lit RPG is the way that the character progresses in the story. The character must progress within the game mechanics. It can't just be described as, the character becomes stronger, or he gains a magical sword and defeats the evil villain. His character growth is actually described in those same gaming terms. He gains levels, he gains skills, he gains abilities, very much in the same way that you would see those kind of growths in a video game, in a tabletop RPG, or in an MMO.
Right.
Huh. Because what's interesting about it, and it's interesting that you say it came into its own about 10 or 15 years ago, is it kind of seems from the little bit I know that it's sort of a derivation and maybe a fulfillment, I guess might be the word, of a genre that came out in the 90s from Japan, which I refer to as kids collect things and make them fight, but people would know as, like, say, Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh! That they start with that idea, because especially, say, like Yu-Gi-Oh!, when they did the show, when they brought it here especially, they tried to incorporate actual gameplay into it. And you had at least the trappings of that. And you had the idea that the game, in some capacity, was real, that it was an active environment for the characters. But again, it was all kind of kept I don't want to say it was kept very simple, because I think the idea was to sell product.
Right.
But it sounds like maybe what happened was the kids that grew up with that, as they got older, they wanted something more substantial. They wanted something more, I guess the word would be fulfilling, something that engaged them more. And would you say that might have influenced this, that it was people that grew up with games, they grew up with the game imagery, they were comfortable with that idea, but they were looking for something with more depth and detail, and that's how, like, the lit RPG came about?
I would say that would be a fair guess at where the genre came from. It's completely possible. I would say part of the draw of lit RPG is that wish fulfillment. People like myself who have been gamers 20, 25 years, most of my life, I've been playing video games, whether it's NES, arcade, RPGs, Final Fantasy, whatever it is. I grew up with games. I know video games and video game mechanics better than I do physics or art or the president's names.
Right.
And so people like me who are nerds and geeks and who love games and who love understanding the mathematics of Dungeons and Dragons or tabletop games, we've always wished that we could live in these understandable worlds. Like, the world is highly complicated. It doesn't make sense in a lot of ways. And so I agree with you in that part of the draw of the genre of litRPG is that wish fulfillment, the desire to live in those game worlds you love, in those worlds that make sense, where you can be super powerful, where you can grow as a character or have personal growth, and it's measurable. Right. I definitely agree with that part of the reason of its popularization.
Now, is a requirement for a litRPG that the main character come from our world, like it's a person from our world going into the RPG, or is that a necessary component? No?
No. It just, again, we really did boil down the two qualifiers for the genre as the story has to exist in a game world with obvious mechanics, can't be hidden, and the main character has to grow. There has to be some progression with those same game mechanics, and they have to be obviously stated. Everything else is up to the author. You can do a portal fantasy where it's from Earth being transported to a game world or to a parallel universe, or the entire world can, including all the main characters, can exist in an already established game world or in a parallel universe or in a portal fantasy, or a sci-fi world. I think that's, again, one of the bigger draws of the genre. It's not limited to fantasy or just sci-fi. It can also be applied as a filter to just about every other fantasy or sci-fi genre. I've read litRPG that's space opera. That's more of a shooter kind of sci-fi look at it, or virtual reality, or transported to another world, or portal fantasy. I mean, or a dungeon master story, where very similar to like a civilization game, where you have or a real-time strategy game. The amount of the different variety of game mechanics that can be applied to a story are as infinite as the amount of games that exist in the world.
But that brings up an interesting point. So what are the major subgenres of litRPG, since there definitely are more than one genre of it?
Yeah. Again, any kind of fantasy or sci-fi genres, subgenres that you can think of, they can also be litRPG subgenres. Again, as long as they meet those two qualifiers, it exists in a world with game mechanics, and the character grows by obviously within those game mechanics. Like I said, so any kind of fantasy you think of, high fantasy, low fantasy, dark fantasy. I've read a litRPG that have those same kind of tropes, those same kind of urban fantasy. I've read litRPG that exists in our modern world where it's an apocalypse situation and game rules are applied for some reason. It crosses a lot of genres, and it kind of extends life to those type of situations as well.
Right. Okay. Well, what about, like, there's one kicking around. Have you ever read it's called The King's Avatar in English? It's about a major gamer who basically loses his place in this virtual reality world and has to start back from the beginning.
Yeah.
But in that game, he's basically just a guy working in a computer, in a PC room, basically, playing a game in his spare time. He's not really, like, sections of the story take place in the game, I suppose, relatively speaking, but it's not really, how can I put this? He's not really immersed in it. He's still just a guy sitting at a PC in a PC room. Would that still count as a litRPG? Or does it all come down to...
Yeah, as long as he's meeting those two qualifiers. I haven't read enough of the story to give you a firm yes or no question on it, but if most of the story exists in a game world, or a world where there's game mechanics and they're obviously stated, and if his character, whether it's his virtual character in a game or he himself personally, if that character has growth, where they're saying like, oh, he's leveling up, he's gaining skills, he's gaining ranks, reputation, whatever it is, if that's the majority of the story, then yeah, it's litRPG. Like, there's a huge variety of possible story opportunities within this genre, because there aren't a firm set of boundaries saying you must do this trope and this trope and this trope. There's only two. Everything else is completely open to the author. So there's a huge variety of stories available, and I think that's part of the appeal, because you can mix and match litRPG with other genres and kind of almost do a buffet style of story possibilities.
Right. Okay.
Because that's kind of interesting too. Because you mentioned growing up playing like video games and the tabletop role playing games and that, and it's funny because I can remember like. Some of the guys I used to hang out with, we still do this, that you would look at the world around you and it was easy to explain stuff in game terms. Like if you saw somebody do something stupid, you'd be like, yeah, he rolled a 20. Huh?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I understand exactly what you're saying. Often in my everyday life, I'll make the same jokes, hit on a girl, she gives you a number. Hey, that's a charisma roll bonus.
Yeah.
Success roll.
Yep.
I actually recently did a video on YouTube that kind of did the same things, where I was incorporating litRPG mechanics into a real world situation. It's a funny, silly video, but in the video, I'm getting up, I'm restoring health and mana as I'm sleeping. I wake up, I brush my teeth, I get an appearance bonus. Clean the house, I get a +5 reputation with my wife.
That's awesome.
All that kind of stuff, and it's very silly, but it kind of visually addresses exactly one of the possibilities of what litRPG is. It's not confined to just fantasy or science fiction. It can be real world stuff. There's just so many possibilities within the genre because people understand game mechanics. There's so many gamers that, like yourself, even if you never read litRPG, you're like, oh, I get that joke.
Yeah, yeah, because certain game mechanics are almost universal. They're almost generic.
Yeah.
And so everyone understands them to one degree or another. Although dice rolls, maybe not. You'd have to be a tabletop gamer to really get those. But so it works. So how big is the fandom for litRPGs then?
I'd say it's not a huge fandom. The genre itself is relatively small. I only pulled up a few different numbers. I know we have a Facebook group for litRPG, and there are 3,000 members.
That's pretty good.
And on the Royal Road, which is a site for amateur litRPG fiction, in addition to other kinds of fiction, I've seen member growth up to 7,000 a day. And there are people who translate as fans fictional works in Korea and Japan and all those other places, and they get 10,000 people reading their stuff a day, and so it's a large community. And it's growing all the time, and it's becoming more of a popular franchise because people are realizing that video game, virtual reality, these gaming mechanic kind of fictions are entirely feasible. And so more and more authors are kind of jumping on, in the United States at least, jumping on the bandwagon and saying, oh, I can write this kind of fiction because I'm an author and I'm a gamer. And so I understand how to put these two things together.
Right. Oh, makes sense. Huh. And of course, with Ready Player One getting a movie, I think next year or the year after, I think it's next year, that'll definitely boost things as well.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah, that kind of popularization of kind of video game fiction, it definitely boosts this genre as well. I mean, there's lots of great... There's been video game fiction before in movies, but I think Ready Player One is probably a good example if it's done well, of course. Something that would also be litRPG.
Yeah, definitely. And I would imagine that a lot of the North American popular, or at least the boom, started probably with Sword Art Online.
Yeah, it did for me at least. I mean, once, again, international works came to the United States and they were translated, Americans like, this is really cool. I love this kind of stuff where it plays into virtual reality, and it's kind of wish fulfillment of living in a game world, whether it's from virtual reality or portal fantasy or transported to another world. For me personally, that's how I found litRPG. I saw Sword Art Online as an anime, and I fell in love with that idea of living in a video game that I loved. I looked up the light novel version of it, translated from Korean or Japan.
Japanese in that case.
Japanese, yeah. And then from there, I just started looking for more fiction along the same lines, and I found that it was called litRPG. And I just fell down the rabbit hole of going from translated stuff to Russian stuff to, they're English guys, American authors who have written this kind of stuff to it, and just spending a ton of money on Amazon or on Kindle Unlimited, just going through all these novels.
So okay then, wow. So yeah, your bill, your Amazon bill must be pretty high then.
For a lot of litRPG guys, it is. It's one of those. The genre plays on those same kind of addictive qualities that MMOs have, or tabletop games have, or video games have. The people who are into the genre are the people who dedicate whole weekends to a raid on World of Warcraft. So those people are super rabid enthusiasts, and they're willing to shell out hundreds of dollars for a whole list of litRPG novels on Amazon or Kindle Unlimited if they do it the economical way. So that's the kind of fan base you have.
That makes sense. Now, do you think that the whole YouTube genre and Twitch and that of people watching playthroughs has also affected things as well? I mean, there seems to be a lot of similarity there.
I think that there's symptoms of the same popularization of gaming culture. In that people are willing to passively view the things that they love. They don't have to be actively involved in them necessarily in their creation. They can just be passive receivers, whether it's through a novel or through a movie or through, a Twitch channel. People have grown up playing video games enough that they can see, I can visualize myself there. I don't need to actually play the game. I can still have a great time. And so there's symptoms of the same popularization of gaming culture, in my opinion.
Makes sense. It's interesting too, because if you go back to, say, the 80s and especially the early 90s, it seemed like there was an attempt to make this kind of thing, especially under the guise of virtual reality, a thing. And there was a lot of attempts at doing stories and that similar to this, but they never seemed to catch on.
No, there were very few examples of that catching on. I've read those as well. Once I got into the genre, there were just never enough books, so I go through a back catalog, and I found the same thing. The last virtual reality boom, it kind of had the same effect, and because people again they see what's possible now, and they extrapolate into the future what's possible then, and so that we get into that same kind of wish fulfillment, where they see, I wish I could live in this video game that it seems decent now, would be really cool in 10 or 15 years. And so again, the literature fulfills that need of that kind of wish fulfillment, that reflection of that kind of society. But you are correct in that. I think it was more because of the times that those books were written, where it wasn't okay to just graphically explain, he made a bad roll, or he made a miss on that dragon because he's too low of a level, whatever the case is.
Right.
They were almost forbidden within the writing community of describing their background roles, because it wasn't okay then, because gaming had been unpopular, and publishers said, no, our readers aren't going to understand this thing. This is too nerdy. This is too geeky. And so I think that's part of why it didn't pick up as much as it does now, because with the advent and the popularization of self-publishing, writers can just say, I don't care what my publisher says. I'm going to put it out myself. Right. And there are a lot more amateur publishers, people like myself, who love reading litRPG, who love this kind of fiction, and they get so fulfilled by it that they have to make their own story. And because of self-publishing, they can do so. They can make any kind of story they want to, and it's their readers who are going to decide whether they're a success or not.
Right. I'm wondering, too, because a lot of the earlier attempts, again, back in like the 80s, early 90s, seemed to piggyback on the cyberpunk genre.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if what happened was, back then people focused more on, say, the like the street life of cyberpunk, the idea of corporate takeover in cyberpunk, and the VR thing. It was there, but it was still attached to the real world. And I'm wondering if what's happened is that seems to be where people are going, because the other parts of it are basically real life now.
That definitely could be the case. I understand what you're saying about the type of fiction that was there. It was more of a cautionary tale. In virtual reality, the popularization of computers hadn't really happened yet. It was very new. So people are scared of new technology. And so I think that was the reflection in those types of literature. And it's not the case anymore. People aren't as afraid. There are generations of people who've grown up with computer systems and video games. Right. And so they can explore the different aspects of those stories now.
Yeah, I can see that, because that was when I read Ready Player One. The thing that got me, and I'm old, like I'm in like my late 40s, and when I was reading it, they talk about going into the computer and going into the Oasis, and I was waiting for the downside. I'm waiting for the negative, because I'm so used to there's always a cost to doing that, and that was the first time I'd seen there wasn't. Yeah.
I mean, in Ready Player One, there was an underlying cost of somebody else taking control of the system, of course, and that kind of threat exists in the corporate side of it. But I understand what you're saying, in that people are okay with it. They're not afraid of the tech. They're not afraid of virtual reality as being this all-encompassing thing that's going to take over your life and ruin your career, as if it was drugs or something like that. We understand that, people can have a hobby and they can still be, real people with real jobs, and then they're okay. And Ready Player One definitely does popularize the idea of almost living in a game world. And for a lot of people, that's a great introduction to the kind of stories that are in litRPG, where you exist, you want to exist in those game worlds as much as possible, because it's fun. It feels more interesting than the real world.
Right.
Well, I was going to say there are downsides to Ready Player One. I mean, the people are literally warehousing themselves in stacks of old mobile homes, and real life really sucks hard in Ready Player One. That's the reason they're in the Oasis.
Yeah, but is the Oasis the cause of that, or is it simply a consequence of the world in general sucking? I mean,
that's true.
From my point of view, when I read Ready Player One, I saw that as a consequence of a downward economy, and that virtual reality took the place for people of an alternative job source.
Yes.
They made their livings in a virtual world, and so they would dedicate most of their time. If you think of the amount of time you spend on a regular job, at least 8 hours plus an hour for a commute maybe, and you sleep another 8 hours. That's a third of your day.
Right,
So we live in our jobs a lot of times. I see my coworkers more than I see my wife most days, and that's just because of our schedules. But if your job is in virtual reality, then it would kind of make sense that you would have that kind of existence as well.
Yeah. And that was the idea too with the Oasis. There was nothing like, say, Black Ice,
right?
Which is an old school cyberpunk standard. Like in the Oasis, you'd get booted out, and that was the worst that would happen. Your brain wouldn't melt and leak out your ears like it would in like the older stories.
Yeah, with the augmented reality. For some reason, I always felt like those virtual reality games thought that our brains would be hacked through visual stimulation, or through neural hacks. And I'm like, that's an interesting leap. Again, it's that cautionary of, I don't know what this thing is, and people are scared of it. So it's a reflection of that. And we just don't feel that way. More and more people, as they grow up, they're comfortable with tech culture. I mean, kids are growing up being used to being entertained by tablets instead of televisions.
Right.
They're on YouTube all the time. I mean, there's an emerging gamer culture where kids prefer to watch people play video games than play them themselves on Twitch.
Right.
And so that it's just that evolution of being comfortable with technology and making it a part of your daily life.
Yeah. The other thing you don't see anymore with the technology is you don't see a lot of, and this is what the kids are into, as a negative, because I think anything that the kids are into, so are the grown-ups. So again, it's not that weird, mysterious thing.
Right. It's not like in the 80s when people were terrified that arcade games were to melt kids' minds.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that doesn't exist anymore. Arcades don't exist really anymore.
That's true.
Well, they're kind of making a comeback, believe it or not. At least up here in Canada where we are, there's a company, Cineplex Odeon, that they're actually building what they call rec rooms now, that are basically combinations karaoke, video game parlors, and bowling alleys, and like young and teenage bars, basically. And they're all these complexes that are designed just for kids to go in and have fun. But video games are still part of that.
Yeah. And with the advent of virtual reality, that's going to be more and more of a thing. More people are going to invest in, because virtual reality is potentially such an expensive prospect to kind of invest in as a system. You're going to see more and more arcades pop up with the virtual reality aspect, just because it's cheaper to do it on a larger scale and have people go in for smaller sessions than it is to spend, $2 or $3 grand on a home setup. Yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely. Although it's not $2 or $3 grand. Remember, PlayStation VR just came out. You can set yourself up for, I guess it'd be about $800 at this point.
Yeah, $800 total in with the system and the goggles, about 4 and 4. Absolutely correct.
Yeah.
But that experience isn't nearly as immersive as the Oculus Rift or the HTC Vive. I also do a podcast on geek and tech stuff, so this is also a part of my life.
Right.
And so I've actually used and I own a couple of those setups. And the HTC Vive and the Oculus Rift blow away the PS4's version of it. And that's just a matter of hardware. For a really good system and a really good experience, you need the expensive hardware. So you need like a computer system that costs $1,000. And then you have the Oculus Rift, which is going to be a $600 investment. And if you want the wands with it, the hand control, that's another couple $100. Or the HTC Vive, which kind of combines the prices of both, but within a room scale fashion where you can move around. And so like I said, a good investment, it's going to be an expensive proposition, at least for now. Maybe later on, as it becomes more popular, as the cost will come down. But for a lot of people, it's for a lot of regular people, it's the realm of fantasy or that thing I saw on television.
Right. Yeah. Don't worry, porn will find a way.
Yeah. The best and cheapest virtual reality experience I've actually had is the mobile experience on Gear VR.
Oh,
it's real simple. You pop it in the headset. It's wireless. There's no wires hanging around. You can move around if you need to. But I think that's a perfect way for people to get an relatively inexpensive virtual reality experience. I've used it when I do when I've done substitute teaching with kids, and they just get blown away by it. They're just yelling and screaming, and the shark touched me, and they're looking around. They think it's the greatest thing ever.
Right, and it's a technology that most people have their phone, so they can just pop it in and look around. Yeah, it's
a much lower bar of entry.
No, we're not quite to entering a true virtual world yet, but we're working on it.
Yeah. I wait for I hope for the day when I can just plug in a cord in my brain and exist there in real time.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting point that I want to bring up, though. So I've noticed that one thing, and this kind of came up in the discussion we were just having, that a lot of lit RPGs don't have much of a downside. I've noticed they don't seem to worry too much about the idea that these people are, say, losing touch with reality, or that spending so much time in a virtual world is going to have consequences.
Yeah, it kind of depends on the story you're reading. Of course, a lot of it's just wish fulfillment, where all the positives are highlighted and very few negatives. And again, also depends on the kind of story you're reading. If it's going to be a virtual reality story where you have to spend equal times in game and out game, then that you're absolutely correct. Some authors don't highlight the negative side of it. Some authors do. Continue Online is a great example of one that does highlight both the benefits and the negative consequences of a virtual reality world that's hugely popular and immeasurably immersive. In that particular series, written by he's a friend of mine. I've interviewed him. Stephen Morris. He paints a picture of a man who's lost his wife or his fiancée, and he's suffering from some severe mental depression issues. And he goes into this virtual world as a way of exploring the possibilities of life. And because in this virtual world, again, this is a fictional part, it's highly immersive. He can go into that world and be whoever he wants to. He can walk in other avatars' shoes and see how they've lived their life and dealt with their tragedies. And it becomes an almost therapeutic experience for him in exploring different aspects of the way people live and in kind of regaining his own humanity at the same time. And in part, it becomes a psychological exploration for him in a lot of ways. Of course, there's also action and adventure and fighting and space battles and fantasy stuff. But there's that underlying thread of what it means to be human, what it means to explore humanity and not give up when bad things happen. And so, so he definitely touches on both those aspects of virtual reality living, I guess.
Excellent. Okay. Sounds like a good take on it. I know that I've heard talk of people, therapists using virtual reality to overcome phobias and things like that already in the real world. Yeah,
absolutely. And again, litRPG is really an extension of what exists. A lot of it's speculative fiction, and that hopefully in the future it can be super immersive and you can live in these worlds. But the reality is not too far off. Like you said, we have virtual reality experiences where therapists will put a headset on someone who's phobic, and they'll have them touch a fake spider, but the visual stimulation is real enough that their mind feels like it's real. Or the most common version of this is going to be the fear of heights. When you're in a virtual reality world, even if it's something as simple as something on your phone, and you're on a tall building and you look down, your body doesn't understand the difference visually that you're not on the edge of a cliff or on the edge of a building, and you feel a sense of vertigo. Your body is just is reacting to visual stimulation, not even auditory stimulation necessarily, or real inner ear canal stuff, balance issues, but just visual stimulation is enough to get your body into having these natural chemical responses. And so the extension of that into an immersive virtuality world where you can play your games isn't that huge of a leap, in my opinion. And I'm excited that it isn't.
Yeah, that's awesome.
The only kind of downside, and again, this is the old school cyberpunk talking, is a lot of these programs and a lot of this technology is going to be expensive. So it's going to be, at least at first, the big corps that are the ones who are going to be in control of everything that gets done with it.
I think in the werewolf, possibly. That's why I always like the Oculus story, though. It was a dude, Palmer Luckey, who was a virtual reality enthusiast, and he made his own headset, and he was selling it on Kickstarter, and it was taped up. You would see it at trade shows, like conventions for Doom, and the demos were literally made with a headset that was full of duct tape because it was still a prototype model. and his story of getting the fame and getting the popularity and getting backers, and then eventually being bought up by Facebook. That story is kind of gives me hope that it doesn't last that way, especially because within that community, within modern gaming communities, there are a lot of indie developers for virtual reality games. And so it's always my hope that those players, whether they're indie tech or indie video game programmers, keep the community alive enough and free enough that anybody can program their own game. And at some point when the tech becomes cheap enough, you can make your own headsets. You know, you don't have to depend upon, these big companies. And the fact that there's at least competition says to me that, okay, this is not just going to be some one person's project and they're going to be able to charge you as much as they want for it. They have to compete with at least 2 or 3 players. And right now it's either Sony with the PlayStation VR headset. There's Facebook with Oculus. There's Steam and Valve with the HTC Vive. And Microsoft is getting into it with the HoloLens, and they're making their own virtual reality device as well. So there are a lot of big players coming into it, and I think that the fact that there is competition is only to our benefit as consumers.
Right. Well, in the headset technology end, I mean, the truth is to actually run a virtual reality simulation still requires a huge amount of processing power and graphics and everything. That's not cheap, and that's not going to be cheap anytime soon.
No, it's absolutely not. It's not super. It isn't cheap, unfortunately. But thankfully, computers are getting more and more robust. And so within 5 or 10 years, it'll be relatively easy to kind of run your own server, or at least run your own game. I mean, you think of what we can do now with higher end PCs. It doesn't take a huge amount of every single. I should say, it becomes easier and easier to run those high end games. And so the same kind of timeline should apply to virtual reality, even if it's a little longer, because it is at least twice the processing power, because you're doing 2 different images within the headset. I think it's so feasible that it's not going to be too much longer where it becomes affordable for just about everybody to have one.
Right. Well, I hope so. Yeah, I definitely hope so, especially considering we've got a huge automation crisis coming up. So people are going to have to do something. They got to give them something. And again, I think, these are all reflections of reality. Ready Player One was written before any of this happened, but it's speculative fiction in a way that is coming true. Jobs are being taken by automated vehicles, just the transportation industry alone is going to go through a major revolution in automation within the next 5 and 10 years. Yep. And so people are going to be out of those jobs, and they're going to have to find something new. And so virtual spaces, or the gig economy, as it's called, might be an alternative for them. Yeah, definitely. I mean, you got to do something while that rig is driving itself across the country, or your car.
I long for the day when I never have to drive again, my friends. I live in California. I drive to work 45 minutes each way. An hour and a half of my day is spent sitting in my car, driving almost mindlessly. So the day that a computer can take over and I can, read a book or play a game, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Wow. That's true. Well, at that point, you probably won't even own your own car. You'll be part of a car sharing program.
I hope so. One less bill.
Well, exactly. Yeah, subscription. Netflix and car sharing. There we go. Okay, so why don't you tell us? Okay, so if someone wanted to get into the lit RPG genre, where should they start?
I would always say go to the sites that are going to pay the authors. So right now that's going to be Amazon. Amazon is probably the biggest collection of stories, and that's mostly because they have the Kindle Unlimited program. Not every country has, but that's a subscription service where you pay about $10 a month, but you get to read essentially all the books you want.
Right, yeah.
That are in that program. So it's a very inexpensive way to find new authors and to take risks on new literature because you're not paying anything extra for it. So Amazon is a great place to find that thing. There are also free sites like the Royal Road. It's a Royal Road and then there's an L, so it's royalroad.com.
I don't know. Okay.
I don't know why they spell it that way, but it's an homage to a popular litRPG story.
Okay.
And that's a place to find a bunch of free stories. And they're in various stages of development. Some are serials where they've been going on for years. Some are just authors who put up a chapter every couple months, so it kind of varies. But it's free, so you can't complain. Well, and then there's translations of other fictions from other countries that aren't licensed in the United States. Novelupdates.com is a great place to look there. And I personally have like 130 series that I've read and reviewed on our site at geekbytespodcast.com. So if you're looking specifically for litRPG recommendations, I got a big old list, folks. If you want to look at it, you can go there and you can find my recommendations, and they're all stories that I love. So
Right. But what would you say are the top 5 lit RPGs that everyone should read?
Oh man, that is such a difficult question.
I can give you top 10 if you want.
Yeah, one because I've read so much, and two because a few of these guys are my friends. I interviewed them as authors, and we become online friends. Right. But I'd say The Way of the Shaman by Vasily Mahenko is definitely a good one. He in Russian has written 9 books, and they're still in translation. We're up to book 4 in the United States in English. So he's just released book 4 this month. Right. There's also the Chaos Seed series by Alaron Kong. He has 4 books out, I believe. He has 5 books out. He has his 6th one come in hopefully by Christmas. Play to Live series. That one's a long series. That one's finished though. It's about 7 books. End Online is another one. That's another longer series, about 5 or 6 books. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I'd say Dragon's Wrath is another good series. And that's about 3 books in. And the author seems to be stalled there a little bit. He hasn't written anything in about 6 or 7 months. I don't know if he's going to finish his series, but he's an American author. So there's nothing translated. I think he wrote himself through a corner. But there's a ton of other series, like Continue Online, Awaken Online, Delvers, LLC, Ascend Online. These are all usually 1 or 2 books into their series, so they're not quite as many in them. But they're all great books. And again, I have 130 more that I would list off for you guys if we have time.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. But in terms of ideas, like just ones that you think are really, really clever, what are some of the coolest premises that you've seen for lit RPGs?
Sure. Continue Online, I already mentioned. That one has both the virtual reality gaming aspects of it, but also has that psychological exploration portion to it. That was definitely unique storytelling. I love Critical Failures by Robert Bevan. He introduces a lot of humor. I mean, there's a lot of immature humor, fart and poop jokes, and a lot of cursing in it, but it is absolutely hilarious, especially if you're a tabletop gamer. You'll recognize a lot of the types of people you would have potentially played with within the game. The jerks, the know-it-alls, a bunch of guys, and you'll find all the inside jokes. It's really hilarious. I also love, I'd say, Chaos Seed series is very interesting in the fact that it's a portal fantasy in that someone's transported to another world, but the story's as equally much about creating a community as it is about a single player adventuring. So there's very much a real-time strategy or civ aspect to it where the character has control of a city that he creates, and he's inviting a bunch of fantasy characters who are disenfranchised in this world. And so there's a lot of things you don't see in other lit RPG, like city building mechanics, developing walls and social structures, and kind of understanding what it means to be a leader within a community that you're trying to create and love. So I'd say those are some unique. I mean, I love all these stories. I've read all the things that I can, and these are just the 130 that I can recommend. I've read at least 300 this year, 300 individual stories or books. And these are the ones that I love the most. So it's real hard to pick out the ones. I also say there's a dungeon master story that's a really unique premise where the main character is a slime. I think it's called the Slime Dungeon.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you've ever played the game like Dungeon Keeper, where the main protagonist is a character who creates dungeons. So he's the dungeon itself. And so his job as a dungeon to survive is to create pathways, traps, populate monsters within the dungeon, and kill adventurers who come in. And if he kills them, and then there's like a balancing act between it. If he kills too many adventurers, then people are going to come to destroy his core and destroy his dungeon because he's killing too many people. And if he doesn't kill enough adventurers, he doesn't get the experience he needs to survive and to create better traps and treasure for people. So there's a really interesting balancing act between resource management and being creative. So I'd say those are some very interesting premises for stories.
Wow.
Sorry.
That's
I
pretty
lost my
good.
earpiece. There you
Wow.
So what were you guys saying?
Oh yeah. No, I was just gonna ask. So I suppose the most unique one I've come across is, and I don't know if I come across one Chinese one. This was a translated Chinese one. Probably you come across it too. I don't remember I'm trying to remember the name of it. It's one where there's a guy who gets on an airplane and he wakes up. It's kind of like the premise of Lost, except it turns out that that our world is the virtual reality world, and he wakes up with the powers of a PC. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, I don't know that specific story. Again, there are so many out there
Right.
in the world. I haven't read them all, even though I've tried. I understand the premise that you're talking about, and I've seen it before. But
Right.
it's a very fun opportunity for growth in that our world is the virtual world.
Yeah, basically, and that we're the NPCs,
Yeah.
and the gamers start showing up. And that I thought that was one of the more interesting. Was that?
Yeah, I've read some interesting. I call it apocalyptic litRPG because it usually revolves around the end of the world kind of situation and people gaining these power-ups as kind of a Hunger Game situation, where it's our world, something bad happens, aliens invade, whatever it is, but they impose role-playing game mechanics on our world. So I would suddenly be able to, kill some monster that shows up on my front door and gain XP to, and use that experience points to buy a power like flight or laser eyes or whatever it is. And other people also in the world will gain the same experiences. So then it becomes, do I kill that other person for experience points, or would I be a good guy and just, kill monsters or other things?
Right.
That's odd. That kind of sounds like Torg.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's just, the RPG mechanics are there, so you see all the interesting possibilities within those systems.
That's different.
That's why I said that's it. There's a ton of storytelling possibilities within the lit RPG community. The sky's the limit in this situations. It's just applying those game mechanics so that you understand the worlds that you're building.
Now, there's an odd thing with a lot of the stories. Do you find that they tend to be, we'll say, one specific character centric, or do they do more of like a group, I guess?
It depends on the story and, of course, the storyteller. Again, that lit RPG can apply to any number of narrative styles, whether it's multiple perspective or single character focused. I tend to find that new authors like myself, I wrote a story recently that just went up on Amazon today called Adventures on Terra, Book One Beginnings.
Congratulations.
And they didn't tell me. Someone in my Facebook group, in our Facebook group said, hey, there's this new story here. Anybody know anything about it? I'm like, hey, that's mine. I didn't know that it actually posted.
Right.
But it's very single person centric. There's one main character. He creates a couple friends. He has a couple friends, but that's kind of it. And a lot of new authors like myself, because we're inexperienced in writing, tend to do that kind of stuff. The more experienced writers tend to do multiple perspectives or focus on larger group dynamics or things like that.
Right.
Right. So what are some of the challenges then as a lit RPG author? What are some of the challenges of writing them?
I'd say there are the general writing challenges, trying to create a good story that people are going to read. Those are the general story challenges that apply to all writing. For lit RPG stories in particular, there's an added level of complexity because you're creating a game world. Or at least you're applying game mechanics to that world. So you, as an author, have to decide generally in advance what those game mechanics are going to be. Is it going to be, a D&D style of game mechanics? Is it going to be some video game mechanics that you're familiar with? Or are you going to create your own world, which means you have to create your own formulas, equations, your own level decisions, how much experience points a particular creature is going to have, skill trees. Is it going to be a cultivation, a ranking system? Is it going to follow an Easternized system where there are more ranks and levels? So all those decisions have to kind of be made in advance. Otherwise, your story doesn't make sense. Because that's one of the draws of the genre, is that this world makes sense in a way that our world is not. The rules apply, and they're consistent. And if they're not consistent, readers are very quick to point them out. I had my beta readers, when I put it before them, they were very like, oh no, this rule is different than this rule. Like, he did damage here, and it's not being applied the same way here. And they, because they have that experience of of reading
Right.
Dungeons and Dragon manuals or playing video games long enough to see, oh, this is how it should be. They're quick to point it out. So there's that extra added level of complexity that maybe may or may not be in other forms of writing.
Right. Something I've always worried about with litRPGs and is that isn't it hard though to put like say the main character in peril or to like make their consequences, because after all the main character can just respawn. Like, I mean, there are some like Sword Art Online, for example, where okay, if you die, you die.
Yeah.
But in a lot of situations, okay, they're playing a video game. There's not a lot of consequence there. And so it seems hard to place the main character in any kind of jeopardy because we all know it's just a video game. He's just going to respawn.
Yes and no. I'd say you are correct in that there are certain levels of fiction. Like my story, one life, that's all you get. You die, you die. So
Right.
there's that level of finality and final consequences to making bad decisions. But I'd say it's not necessarily a disadvantage to the character to have independent lives because it makes you more bold. It makes that character more likely to take risks within the storyline. So you get a more exciting story that way when you have respawns. If you want to create consequences, you do it the same way game developers do. You create some kind of negative effect, whether it's a loss of experience points, you lose a level, you lose your equipment, you might drop all your loot and you have to get to it before some other character does. You lose skills, whatever the case is. It's kind of the same rules that an MMO has to decide on. An MMO might decide a massive multiplayer online game.
Right.
Might decide that there are no consequences. And so you're right in that it becomes less fulfilling because there's no risk, so the rewards aren't quite as interesting.
Right.
And other MMOs have a variety of consequences for death penalties.
That's true. Yeah, some of them have had... Well, the simplest way is to actually come up with penalties that don't involve dying or living for the character. You know, it would involve the loss of like another character, for example, or status or something else.
Reputation.
Reputation, exactly. Something that's going to affect them greatly. And of course you have to make a character that the audience cares about.
Right. And so those are all the same challenges that you have in other writings, making a character that somebody can empathize with and see themselves in.
Right. Now, I noticed something. Sorry, Don, just if I can go for a sec. I noticed something when you were listing off some of your favorites and that, and you were mentioning that litRPGs tend to be really long stories, don't they?
They can be. Some are just one-offs, but I think it again plays with the same mentality of good video games. You want as many sequels as possible because people love your stories.
That's
true.
true.
And so you can explore 7 or 8 novels and still feel fresh. Because just like within an MMO, the story never really ends.
Right.
Instead of a multiplayer, you just go on different quests. You go on different questions. Later on in the series, you get epic raids.
Right.
And so that same kind of storytelling mentality definitely filters into litRPG for a lot of authors because that's what they're basing their worlds on. They're basing their world on their gaming experience. And other readers sense that and they appreciate it.
Okay, I can see that.
Sorry,
Don, you were going to say? Go.
Oh, I was going to say, I think the last point there kind of hits it at what Rob was getting at. I think with this style, why it would come about now would be you can have, even though we know the character isn't in genuine corporeal real world peril, you can still empathize and fear for the character because I think we've gotten to a point where enough people in society, we've played these games, so when the character in the game, in the story, is imperiled, it brings back memories and emotions from when we were playing a game and we had characters in similar situations. And I think...
see that.
Especially if you consider the hours or weekends people put into raids. Like, if you're at that last boss and you spent 30 hours getting there in a good raid and you die and the party wipes, it's the most horrible feeling in the world. You've literally wasted, days of your time getting to that spot. And even though your character comes back, in the starter town or whatever it is, there's still a sense of loss. And when I read those kind of stories, I'm like, oh, I get that. Yeah, that's happened to me. Party wipe.
And that's something new that an author can play on. It's kind of a new experience that's in the lexicon of that even if you're not a big gamer, you're probably familiar enough with the concept that, yeah, you can sort of feel that pain because in the back of your head, you know what goes on all to get to that point, unless you're a dedicated non-gamer and then you're laughing because you wasted your life, you loser, which is probably how you feel about your significant other who plays video games in real life and et cetera.
Either way, as long as they're enjoying the story and they're happy, I'm okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no, that makes sense.
Yeah, and another way that authors, I think, in the community have created consequences for the character is almost a reflection of modern life in gaming, in that some people do it for a living. There are Chinese gold farmers. There are people in Korea who really make a living farming gold or farming items and selling them for real world currency, whether it's a trading card game or an MMO or something like that. And so that same kind of real life consequences is reflected in some LitRPGs, in that their livelihood for their families or for their whatever they're doing in the real world depends upon their performance in a game. So if they suck at the game, if they die suddenly and they lose a level or they lose their items that they just got that they plan to sell for a week's worth of wages, there's a consequence for them outside of the game and in the game.
That makes sense. Yeah, that does. Yeah, I guess that's a good way. That's a good way. Also, it strikes me in a way that video games have become the new sports on some levels. I mean, in past generations, you could everyone understood sports metaphors because everyone watched football or baseball, basketball, whatever. And most people had played it in high school, so you could empathize, you could understand sports dramas and such, sports stories. But now people are playing video games, so everyone understands those feelings and those ideas and everything. So it makes sense. It does make sense.
Yeah, absolutely. The LitRPG genre is absolutely a consequence of the popularization of gaming culture. I agree with you 100%. Even gaming as a real sport is becoming more and more of a thing. You got esports, where people are watching, teams go head to head in some game, like StarCraft or a fighting game or whatever. It's again more popular overseas, which again makes sense why LitRPG would appear there first.
Oh yeah,
but in the United States, it's also becoming more and more popular.
Yeah. There was just a esports tournament or something to that effect in Toronto just like a month or two back, and it filled one of Toronto's biggest stadiums. Yeah,
absolutely. And again, that's a consequence of the popularization of that gaming culture. So people understand they're willing to watch those guys play this game because they understand the nuances the same way people who love watching football understand it. People yell at their screen. They say, "No, you should have done this instead of that." I don't know what those things are. That's not my thing. But if you put me in front of a gaming screen, I see people playing like, "Oh no, he's doing that maneuver incorrectly. He should be doing it this way. He played that card wrong. He should have done that other spell card if it's her turn or something." So I agree.
Yep, definitely. No, sorry, go.
Oh, no, I was going to say, I imagine, too, part of it for video games is that we've gotten to a point where you can do that. It's not like, say, back in my younger days where, to use a phrase a friend of ours uses to describe video games, yellow square hits red square. Like, you can empathize more with the action in a video game.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and again, that's technology advances, gaming advances, literature advances in the same respects. Everything's tied in. And I love the world that we live in this respect, at least, in that a lot of these things that I love, virtual reality, gaming, literature, sci-fi, fantasy, they're all kind of merging together within this genre.
Right. Now, talking about them advancing, so let's say something. Where would you like to see the LitRPG genre go? Like, what would you like to see more of in the genre?
I would love to read more stories. I mean, that's always the case with something you love, but especially with LitRPG, as a reader, I cannot get enough. And I know I'm not alone in the community. It's almost like literary crack. And that once you get into it, that first dose is free, man. It's free on Kindle Unlimited. But the next one's going to cost you. And we're more than willing to pay. I've literally shelled out for some serials $3-4 for a 100-word novel. Because it's so engaging, because it has that same kind of fulfillment of being in a fantasy world, but understanding the system like an MMO or any kind of video game system. I would love to just see more literature out there. I would love to see more authors come in and write amazing stories. And I think the genre itself and the community lends itself to amateur authors like myself taking up the pen for the first time.
Right.
Like, so personally, I've never written a story before in my entire life. I mean, I've written term papers for college and engineering stuff, but I've never been a creative writer. But because of this particular community and its willingness and it's almost a calling out for new authors and people who love writing or who love gaming. And they say writers should write what they know. Well, I'm a gamer. I've gamed my whole life, so writing that kind of thing seems feasible to me.
Right. Yeah, makes sense.
I could never write high fiction. I could never write a space opera because I know nothing about those genres. I know nothing about those things in reality, right? But I've been a gamer my whole life, practically. So I could write a game about video game fiction or a game world that has game mechanics in it, video game mechanics, because that's what I know. And a lot of people are like me in that they've been gamers their whole lives. They're tabletop gamers or video game players, or, they've just read role-playing games or whatever it is. And so they have stories in their brains that just percolate as they read more and more in their stuff. And there's tons of people who are just first-time authors and they're successful on Amazon because, there's a huge desire for these stories within that community.
Right. Okay. But are there any types of particular story types you'd like to see more of that you don't think are being mined properly?
That's a tough question because there is so much stuff out there and you don't really know what you want until you see a little bit of it. So it's hard for me to speculate on what I would love to see. And I've seen so much already. I've seen dark fiction. Right. I've seen space operas. I've seen, the Dungeon Master story. I've seen regular fiction, science fiction. So I can't say there's any particular type of story I would love to see more of. I would love for better authors than me to take to dip a toe in this and show me what I'm missing. That's what I would love. I would love for them to say, I'm an urban fantasy author and I'm going to do a litRPG story, but because I know urban fantasy, I'm going to mesh the two together and create something new and create something interesting and unique. Right. I would love to see just new types of stories. I can't tell you what they are because I haven't read them yet, but I'll love it when I see it.
Right. That's a great answer. How about, let's look at the flip side of that, though. What would you like to see less of?
I would like to see less bad editing or no editing. Again, that's another consequence of it encouraging amateur authors or first-time authors is that they're first-time authors like me. And so sometimes their stories are a little rough. And we don't realize it because we just don't have a background in writing.
Right.
And so learning within the community of these are the ways you have to get editors, or you have to get a lot of beta readers, and you have to work hard to polish your story even once it's finished. I would love to see things like better spelling, better grammar. Because again, if they're amateur works, I understand, and I give them some part of what I love is that they're willing to take the risk, because that's a hard thing to do to put yourself out there and to create something out of your mind and to be open to criticism from people. Right. That takes some nads, man. That takes some. It does. Yeah, some brass ones. So I always give them credit for it, and I kind of give a little bit of leeway. But on the other side, as a consumer, if I'm paying for it, if I'm shelling out, $2, $3, $4, $5, whatever it is, I expect some of those spelling errors to have gone away by now.
Yeah, you would hope. You would hope.
Yeah, I'm cool with it if it's free. I don't care. You can have spelling errors every other word, and it's free. So whatever. But if I'm paying for it, I have a higher bar that you have to meet.
Right. Huh. Well, are there any other issues that the community is struggling to deal with, or is trying to deal with, or how can I put this? For example, issues like sexism, for example. I would imagine, because a lot of this is written by young men, especially. Maybe I'm wrong. There must be an issue with female perspectives and such in litRPGs.
I would say yes. Yeah, I can't say that there's definitely an issue with sexism. I'm on the wrong side of that issue to give an opinion on it. But you are correct that a lot of this is being written by guys. Not all of it, though. I've read several works of fiction, like Fantasia. There's some other works that are really good fiction written with a female perspective or written by a female author. Right. And they're really interesting and they're well written, but they're very much a minority. Right. And I think part of that is just, again, an extrapolation of perceived gaming culture. Yeah. In reality, gaming culture is pretty well represented. About half of them are women, half of them are men, according to studies. But the perception of gaming culture, the perception of the gamer, is that it's mostly a sausage fest, that it's a bunch of dudes. And so that same kind of perceived reality of gaming culture again bleeds into the writing of litRPG, and that most women aren't going to feel comfortable writing in that genre because they don't perceive it as themselves, their stories being seen necessarily. I've done what I can, of course, and within my story, there's a very nice romance story within the gaming culture as well. And that's in part because I'm married, and I kind of wrote my story for my wife. My goal within my goal within my story was to make her laugh. She's not a gamer. She's not into litRPG or role playing games like that. So I kind of wrote it with her her as a reader, basically. She would actually do a lot of my first draft editing as a Gary foot massager. So it was kind of a couple reconnecting thing in that respect. As well. And I knew a joke had landed when she was reading it and she just started to giggle or laugh. And so I tried to incorporate a healthy female perspective within my story as well. But it's difficult, especially when you don't have those kind of influences in your lives.
No, I can see that. Also, I know those game statistics they tend to trot out are a little bit messed up. Like, they're actually playing with them a little bit. Because, for example, yes, they'll tell you half of gamers are female, which is true. But they're including casual gamers in there, which, of course, and casual and puzzle gamers. Women tend to play different types of games than men do on average. And, of course, if you look at the top-selling female games, the Gaming Association of the United States puts out a paper every year describing, I don't know if you've seen it or not, that they put out a booklet of statistics. And one of the things you'll notice is that at least you can tell the female games, because basically The Sims is like half the top 20.
And that's perfectly appropriate. We're different kinds of people. We have different interests. You know, most romance novel readers are women. That doesn't mean there aren't men that exist, or that men can't be good romance novel writers. And I think the same kind of logic applies. I don't mean to imply that all women play all kinds of video games, but they do have that same gamer mentality. Even if it's just an emerging part of the gamer culture, it still exists. So in my opinion, it should be reflective. It should be reflected in litRPG possibly. And I would love to see more women writers write litRPG stories. And I always on forums and within our community, I think we're very, very welcoming of women perspectives. It's just,
that's good.
It's just I think it's harder for women sometimes to enter what they perceive to be a male dominated community or society.
Yeah, I think so too. And also I think some of it's probably generational as well. I mean, as we get a generation of girls that grow up playing adventure games and things like that, we're going to see more girls involved with litRPGs, etc.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely. Sorry, Don, you were going to say?
Oh no, I'm just this is all kind of a new kind of whole medium for me, because we were talking, me and Rob were talking about this a couple weeks ago, so that's why I'm kind of glad you showed up, because now I can probe you for info. I'm wondering,
dude, this isn't that kind of podcast.
Oh, it could be. He never wants me to bring out the death ray. Anyway, I'm curious about you talked about the internal consistency is important to the readers in general. How much into the game part do people get? Like, are people actually writing what is in essence an effective role playing game and then basing a story around those rules, or are they kind of faking it?
It depends on the writer. I know I've interviewed at least 7 or 8 litRPG authors. For the podcasts, and they've all said the same things to me. They have multiple spreadsheets for gaming rules, for character sheets, for skill descriptions, for monster descriptions, including, the die roll that they would possibly roll, or the damage possibilities, the experience points. So they're literally, for a lot of the good ones, they're creating whole gaming systems, even if they're not quite as complicated or as all-encompassing as a Dungeons and Dragons, kind of rulebook necessarily. They're still legitimate gaming systems. Like, personally, I have those same spreadsheets for my novel. I have one for character stats. I have one for character names, but also skills, and like 20 or 30 monsters, including descriptions and possible attacks, and their possible damages. whole sheets of equations for how a strength modifier will affect a damage roll for one character, but not for another, because he's more of a dex build and he's an assassin, so he relies more on agility and intelligent boasts. And this guy's a glass cannon, so his intelligence has to be maxed out. All that kind of stuff. And so they really are creating, and sometimes they're cheating a little bit. They'll base it on other established role-playing game mechanics like Dungeons & Dragons or Pathfinder or, just video game stuff that they've recognized and love and understand. But for the most part, if they're good LitRPG authors, they're full systems.
Wow. Because that's interesting, because we talked a while ago on the show about indie role-playing games and how, say, in the 90s, you started getting a lot of tabletop role-playing game designers were taking the game more towards a story than a game. And it's interesting to find that there are people who are now taking stories the other way into the realm of game.
Yeah, because it's an appeal. I mean, to me, that's one of the great things about modern video gaming, modern tabletop gaming, is you don't have to choose one or the other. You can have both. You can have a video game, like Mass Effect, which is essentially a sci-fi shooter game, but you have role-playing mechanics in there. You can upgrade your armor. You have stats on your weapons. You have character choices you make, and they affect your reputation with characters. Or you have tabletop gaming, which is largely visualized in your brain, but there has to be a great engaging story. But there's also all those stats and numbers that geeks like me love, because you want to min-max our characters. And so the fact that literature can reflect that same kind of thing, where you don't have to choose between story and gaming mechanics, I think it fits so many people, and that's why it's so popular, because it's fulfilling a need that people didn't realize that they had.
Huh.
Oh, that's fascinating.
And it's interesting because, it shows that, I guess it's a gamer speak has really become its own thing. It's like its own lexicon, and it's, again, universal enough that it can now be utilized for things other than straight up gaming. Yeah.
I've heard these terms before in regular life. I pwned that guy. It's not an uncommon phrase nowadays. Even people who aren't gamers, they understand what it means.
Yeah, that's true. Well, they become part of internet memes and the internet lexicon, and yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and again, that's one of those things about the internet. It's so easy to popularize ideas through that medium that you couldn't do before it was there.
Right.
I think that's part of the reason that this type of literature couldn't have taken off like it has in the 80s and the 90s, when that last virtual reality boom occurred, is because the internet wasn't as pervasive. It wasn't as easy to publish on the internet. It wasn't as easy to get those stories filtered around the world. Like, I highly doubt that anybody would be able to translate and publish in the United States as many stories as they have from Korea or Japan or Russia. It would be a huge undertaking. It's rather expensive. I've talked to Magic Jump Books, is a publishing company in Russia who specializes in translating litRPG stories from Russian into English. That's where the Shaman gets is translated from, Vasily Mahenko. And he told me in an interview, it costs him $4,000 to translate one book and to put it in English. Right. So there's a huge expense on his part to do that kind of thing. So if there's not an audience already built in, it's not going to happen. But because of the internet, somebody can do that on their own as a fan service, as just a fan, and do that kind of thing, or as an independent author. I could never in the 80s get a book published on gaming or litRPG. Because publishers have to be super selective about the things that they're going to invest their time and money in. And if they don't know if it's a sure thing, they're not going to do it. But with indie publishing and the internet and the opportunities on like Amazon for self-publishing, it's you write it, you press the button, and it's there for people to consume, and it'll succeed or die on its own merits.
Yep. Yeah, that's one of the great things about the age we live in. Self-publishing is awesome.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I wish you great success with your book. I hope that you get lots of good reviews and that you're inspired to write more sequels.
I hope so too. It's more of just like a project for me. I mean, I don't expect to be a famous author. There is just a story in my brain that I had to tell, and I hope some people enjoy the jokes and the journey that the characters go on. And if they do, great. If they don't, I appreciate you taking the time to read it.
Any other questions, Don?
Oh, I'm wondering, one kind of last thing. I remember not that long ago, at least to me, but remember I'm old, there used to be a lot of, I guess, animosity between different gamers, like video game and tabletop gamers didn't get along. For video games, there were casual gamers and real gamers. And do you find that there's still some of that, or have they all sort of just congregated together now?
I think that there's enough games for everybody to be satisfied with what they love. And I can't speak for all gamers. I usually play single player campaigns because I don't like other people in multiplayer. But I'd say on the whole, gamers are more accepting of other types of gamers because they understand, as growing up loving something that not everybody did, the ostracism that can take place within a geek community. And so I think they're more willing to accept, oh, you're a casual gamer, that's awesome. As long as you love it, have a good time. Maybe it's not my thing, but if you're having a good time, you go do your thing. I'm sure there are still trolls, but I think on the whole, people are kind of a lot better at it.
Right.
Huh. Okay. All right, then. I think that we're hitting the hour and a half mark, so it's probably time to bring this to a close. We don't want to take too much of your time. And wow, you've given us a lot to think about, Ramon. Thank you very much for coming on.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I love talking to you guys. You guys are real fun to talk to. I think we fall in the same kind of nerdy communities and the same interests. So I'm always happy to talk to fellow geeks and nerds. We have to stick together, guys. Otherwise, the bullies are going to gang up on us.
That's true. That's true. Just like back in high school. Anyway.
I resent that. I was a bully.
I see. You've reformed at least. I love a reformed bully. They're great geek advocates.
Right. All right. So, any final thoughts, Don, before we go?
Oh, this was, like I say, this was fantastic because it's like discovering a whole new, like universe. Cause a few weeks ago, I had no idea this kind of thing exists. And now you find out there's a whole big, universe of it that's been going on and you didn't even notice.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's
absolutely. And it's like, it fulfills a need you didn't know you had. And yeah, absolutely. I felt the same way the first time I read a story in litRPG. I was like, I've been looking for this my whole life. I didn't know it though. And, hundreds of books later, I have a podcast and I'm writing my own novel.
Yeah, it's amazing. It really is how it can transform our lives. All right, so on that note, gentlemen, thank you very much again, Ramon, for coming on. Thanks, Don, and I wish everyone a good evening. Have a great week, and we'll see you in 2 weeks with another amazing episode of the Department of Nerdly Affairs, which will be about something awesome, and you'll have to wait 2 weeks to find out what. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you'd like to hear more or join the conversation, come visit us at obeythedna.com. You can also find us on iTunes or whatever fine podcast site forgot to lock their back door. So until next time, remember that to master the nerdly arts takes time, practice, and enough Coca-Cola to drop a rhino. See ya!